He thought no one would notice. But the moment her lipstick touched that napkin, everything began to unravel. In a quiet Philadelphia diner wrapped in stormlight, a single warning written in red is about to pull a seasoned detective into a web of secrets more dangerous than anything he has ever faced. What he doesn't know yet is that the person sitting beside him is the last man he should trust, and the only person who can save him is the waitress who risks everything to warn him. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The rain fell in steady sheets against the windows of the Rosewood Diner, creating rivulets that distorted the gas lamps of Philadelphia's cobblestone streets into golden smears against the November darkness. Detective William Ashford sat in his usual corner booth, the one that offered him a clear view of both entrances and the kitchen door, a habit formed from 12 years of police work that he could never quite shake even during his off-duty hours. The year was 1898, and the city had grown increasingly complex, its prosperity bringing not only progress but shadows where criminal minds could flourish. William removed his rain-dampened coat and hung it on the brass hook beside the booth. At 32 years old, he cut an impressive figure, standing 6 feet 2 inches tall with broad shoulders that filled his well-tailored gray suit. His dark hair, slightly tousled from the weather, framed a handsome face marked by intelligent gray eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes had earned him a reputation at the Philadelphia Police Department as one of their most perceptive investigators, a man who could read a crime scene like others read the morning newspaper. Tonight, however, his mind was not on criminal investigations, but on the troubling conversation he had endured earlier that day with his superior, Captain Morris, and the man who now sat across from him, Detective Harold Brennan. Brennan had recently transferred from New York, arriving with glowing recommendations and an air of easy confidence that William found somewhat forced. There was something about the man's too-ready smile and the way his pale blue eyes never quite held William's gaze for long that set off quiet alarms in the detective's instincts. The diner was warm and welcoming, its interior all polished wood and brass fixtures that gleamed under the soft glow of electric lights, one of the newer establishments in the city to have made the transition from gas. The scent of fresh coffee and apple pie filled the air, mingling with the murmur of quiet conversations from the handful of other patrons seeking refuge from the storm. This was William's sanctuary, a place where he could think, away from the pressures of the precinct and the increasingly political nature of police work in a growing city. Brennan was speaking, his voice smooth and practiced, discussing a case they had been assigned to work together, a series of thefts from wealthy homes in the Rittenhouse Square area. William listened with half his attention, nodding at appropriate moments while his mind catalogued the inconsistencies in Brennan's theories. The man was either remarkably uninformed about basic investigative procedure, or he was deliberately steering the investigation away from certain avenues. Neither possibility sat well with William. It was then that she approached their table. William had noticed her the moment he entered, as he noticed everything, but now she stood directly before them, and he found himself truly seeing her for the first time. She was perhaps 25 years old, with auburn hair pinned up in a simple but elegant style that revealed the graceful curve of her neck. Her face was lovely, with high cheekbones, a delicate nose, and eyes of the most remarkable shade of green he had ever seen, like sunlight through spring leaves. There was an intelligence in those eyes, a keen awareness that seemed to take in everything around her with the same careful observation he himself practiced. She wore the standard uniform of the diner's waitresses, a crisp white shirtwaist and dark skirt with a small apron, but she carried herself with a quiet dignity that transcended the simple attire. Her hands, he noticed, were elegant, but showed the signs of hard work, the kind of honest labor that built character. When she smiled, it was genuine but reserved, the smile of someone who had learned to guard her true feelings behind a mask of professional courtesy. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice soft but clear, with the refined accent of someone educated beyond what her current station might suggest. "What may I bring you this evening?" Brennan ordered without much thought, barely glancing at her, his attention already returning to the documents he had spread across the table. William, however, found himself momentarily captivated. There was something in the way she held herself, a tension beneath the calm exterior, as though she carried some burden that weighed heavily upon her. "Coffee, please," William said, his voice warmer than usual. "And perhaps a slice of that apple pie I've been smelling since I walked in." She nodded, and for just a moment, her eyes met his with an intensity that surprised him. It was as though she was trying to communicate something, some urgent message that could not be spoken aloud. Then the moment passed, and she turned away, moving back toward the counter with graceful efficiency. William watched her go, his detective's mind now fully engaged. Something was wrong. He could sense it the way a sailor senses an approaching storm, that prickling awareness that had saved his life more than once in his career. The woman was frightened, or at the very least, deeply troubled. But what could a waitress in a respectable diner possibly fear? And why did he feel so certain that her fear had something to do with him? Brennan continued talking, oblivious to William's distraction, outlining his theory that the Rittenhouse Square thefts were the work of vagrant criminals passing through the city. It was a convenient theory, one that required little actual investigation and would allow them to close the case with minimal effort. Too convenient, William thought. The thefts had been too sophisticated, too well planned, suggesting inside knowledge of the victims' schedules and the layout of their homes. This was not the work of common thieves. The waitress returned with a silver coffee pot and 2 cups, along with William's pie. She poured the coffee with steady hands, but William noticed the slight tremor that she could not quite control. As she set his pie before him, she placed a napkin beside it, her movements careful and deliberate. Then, with barely a glance at either of them, she withdrew once more. William reached for his fork, but something made him pause. The napkin was positioned oddly, slightly askew, as though placed in haste. He picked it up, and his blood ran cold. Written across the white linen in red lipstick were 8 words that would change everything. Don't trust the man beside you. His training took over immediately. His expression did not change. His hand did not shake. He casually wiped his mouth with a napkin, as though noticing nothing unusual, while his mind raced through possibilities. The warning was clear, but what did it mean? Don't trust Brennan. The message seemed to indicate that the woman knew something about his partner, something dangerous enough to risk revealing herself by writing such a message. William's eyes found the waitress across the room. She was standing behind the counter, ostensibly organizing menus, but her gaze was fixed on him with barely concealed anxiety. Their eyes met, and in that moment, an understanding passed between them. She knew something important, something that put her at risk simply by knowing it. Are you listening, Ashford? Brennan's voice cut through his thoughts, edged with irritation. William forced himself to focus on his partner, studying the man with new eyes. Brennan was perhaps 35, with sandy hair and unremarkable features that would be easy to forget in a crowd. He dressed well, always impeccably turned out, with an expensive pocket watch that seemed beyond the means of a detective's salary. His hands were clean, almost delicate, not the hands of a man who had spent years in the rough work of street-level police investigation. Of course, William replied smoothly, buying himself time to think. You were saying that we should focus on the transient population, but I wonder if we shouldn't also consider the possibility of inside assistance. These homes were chosen carefully, robbed during specific windows of opportunity. That suggests planning, information. Brennan's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. I think you're overcomplicating things, Ashford. Sometimes a simple explanation is the correct one. Perhaps, William said, taking a sip of his coffee. But in my experience, when something appears too simple, it usually is. The tension between them stretched taut, and William realized that whatever game was being played here, Brennan knew that William was no longer a willing participant. The question was what Brennan would do about it, and more importantly, what the waitress knew that had prompted her desperate warning. As if sensing his thoughts, the young woman moved toward their table again, this time carrying a fresh pot of coffee. Her hands were steadier now, as though having made her decision to warn him had given her some measure of calm. She refilled their cups without speaking, but as she leaned forward to pour William's coffee, she whispered so softly that only he could hear, her lips barely moving. The storage room. 10 minutes. Please. Then she was gone, and William was left with his racing thoughts and the dangerous knowledge that he was now involved in something far larger than a simple series of thefts. The woman's fear, Brennan's evasiveness, the cryptic warning, they all pointed to a web of deception that reached into the very heart of the Philadelphia Police Department. William finished his pie slowly, maintaining the appearance of normalcy while his mind worked through strategies. He needed to speak with the waitress to learn what she knew. but he had to do so without alerting Brennan. His partner was watching him now with barely concealed suspicion, as though trying to determine whether William had noticed anything unusual about the napkin. "I need to make use of the facilities," William said casually, rising from the booth. "I'll just be a moment." Brennan nodded, his eyes cold. "Don't be long. We still have work to discuss." William walked toward the back of the diner, past the counter and through the swinging doors that led to the kitchen. The staff barely glanced at him, accustomed to customers seeking the washroom. But instead of turning left toward the facilities, William moved right, toward the storage room the waitress had indicated. The door was slightly ajar, and he slipped inside, pulling it closed behind him. The room was small and dim, lit only by a single gas lamp turned low. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with dry goods and supplies. And there, standing in the shadows, was the young woman who had risked everything to warn him. In the lamplight, he could see the fear in her eyes, but also a fierce determination that spoke of courage and strength. "Who are you?" William asked softly, his voice gentle despite the urgency of the situation. "And what do you know about Detective Brennan?" She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and when she spoke, her voice was low but clear, filled with emotion that she had obviously been holding back for far too long. "My name is Catherine Merrick, and the man you're sitting with murdered my brother." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence, heavy with accusation and grief. William studied Catherine Merrick's face in the dim lamplight, searching for signs of hysteria or delusion, but found only clarity and a deep, abiding sorrow that spoke of terrible truth. Her green eyes, now glistening with unshed tears, held his gaze with unwavering intensity. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Merrick," William said quietly, his detective's mind already working through the implications. "Tell me everything, but we must be quick. Brennan will become suspicious if I'm gone too long." Catherine nodded, wrapping her arms around herself as though warding off a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the storage room. "My brother, James Merrick, was a detective with the Philadelphia Police Department. He was investigating the Rittenhouse Square thefts, the same case you and that man are working now. 3 months ago, James came to me and told me he had discovered something terrible, that the thefts were being orchestrated by someone inside the department, someone with connections to organized crime families in New York." William felt his stomach tighten. This aligned too perfectly with his own suspicions about Brennan's convenient theories and expensive lifestyle. "Go on," he urged, keeping his voice low. "James said he had evidence, documents and photographs that proved the conspiracy. He was planning to take everything to the commissioner, to expose the corruption before more innocent people were victimized. But 2 days before he could act, he was found dead in an alley near the docks." Catherine's voice broke slightly, but she forced herself to continue, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "The official report said he had been killed during a robbery attempt, that he had surprised some thieves and paid with his life. But James was an excellent detective, trained and cautious. He would never have been caught unaware like that, and he certainly wouldn't have been carrying anything of value in that neighborhood." "Why didn't you go to the police with your suspicions?" William asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Because I didn't know who to trust," Catherine said, her voice rising slightly with frustration and fear. "James had told me that the corruption went high up, that powerful men were involved. If I went to the wrong person, I would end up like my brother, another convenient accident. So I waited, and I watched. I took this job at the diner because James had mentioned that detectives from the precinct often came here. I thought if I could observe them, learn who might be trustworthy, I could find someone to help me seek justice for James." William felt a surge of admiration for this woman who had sacrificed her position and safety to pursue the truth. "And you chose to trust me. Why?" For the first time, something like warmth flickered in Catherine's eyes. "I've been watching you for 3 weeks now, Detective Ashford. I've seen how you treat people, how you notice things others miss, how you question everything rather than accepting easy answers. And tonight, when that man, Brennan, came in with you, I recognized him immediately. He was one of the last people James mentioned before he died. James said there was a detective coming from New York who was somehow connected to the whole operation, someone who would try to close the investigation quietly and protect the real criminals. The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture that was both clearer and more dangerous than William had imagined. "Did your brother tell you where he hid this evidence?" "Yes," Catherine said, reaching into her apron pocket and pulling out a small brass key. James gave me this the last time I saw him. He said that if anything happened to him, I should retrieve the documents from a safety deposit box at the Merchants Trust Bank on Chestnut Street. But I can't go alone, Detective Ashford. They're watching me. I'm certain of it. Twice in the past month, I've noticed the same men following me home from work. I've been too frightened to retrieve the evidence, afraid that leading them to it would destroy the only proof of James's findings and get me killed in the process. William took the key from her trembling hand, his fingers briefly touching hers in a moment of connection that sent an unexpected warmth through him. Even in this desperate situation, even surrounded by danger and deceit, he found himself acutely aware of her presence, of the courage she had shown, of the grace with which she bore her grief. There was something remarkable about Catherine Merrick, something that went far beyond her physical beauty. "I'll help you," he said firmly, his gray eyes meeting her green ones with a promise. "But we must be careful. If Brennan suspects that I know anything, or that you've spoken to me, we'll both be in danger. Tomorrow is Saturday, and the bank will be open until noon. Can you meet me there at 11 o'clock? "Yes," Catherine breathed, relief washing over her features. "Thank you, Detective Ashford. You don't know what this means to me, to finally have someone who believes me, who will help me bring James's killers to justice." "Call me William," he said softly, surprised by his own informality. "And I promise you, Miss Merrick, we will find the truth. Your brother's death will not be in vain." "Catherine," she replied, a slight smile touching her lips despite the gravity of their situation. "If we're to be partners in this dangerous endeavor, we should dispense with formalities." The sound of footsteps in the kitchen beyond made them both freeze. William moved quickly to the door, listening intently. The steps passed by, fading toward the front of the diner, but the interruption reminded them both of the precariousness of their position. "I must go before Brennan comes looking for me," William said. "Act naturally when you return to the dining room. Show no sign that we've spoken. And Catherine, be careful. Watch for anyone following you, and vary your route home." "I will," she promised. "And William, there's something else you should know. James mentioned a name in his last conversation with me, someone he believed was at the center of the entire operation. He called him the conductor, as though this person was orchestrating everything like a symphony. James said the conductor had connections that reached from the criminal underworld all the way into the highest levels of Philadelphia society. William committed this information to memory, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Did he give you any indication of the conductor's true identity?" "No," Catherine said regretfully. "He said it was too dangerous for me to know until he had solid proof. But he did say that the conductor was someone respected, someone above suspicion, which made him all the more dangerous. Then we'll have to uncover his identity ourselves," William said with determination. "The evidence in that safety deposit box may give us the answers we need. Until tomorrow, Catherine. Stay safe." He slipped out of the storage room, moving quietly back through the kitchen and emerging into the main dining room with what he hoped was a casual expression. Brennan was still sitting in the booth, but his posture had changed. He was leaning forward, his pale eyes sharp and watchful, like a predator sensing disturbance in its territory. "You were gone quite a while," Brennan observed as William slid back into his seat. The comment was light, almost joking, but William heard the suspicion beneath it. "I apologize," William said smoothly, picking up his coffee cup. "I encountered the proprietor on my way back, and we got to discussing the recent changes in the neighborhood. You know how these local business owners like to bend a detective's ear about every little concern." Brennan's expression remained neutral, but William could see the calculations happening behind those cold eyes. "Indeed. Well, as I was saying before your departure, I believe we should conclude our work on the Rittenhouse Square case by Monday. I've prepared a report suggesting that the perpetrators were likely transient criminals who have since moved on from Philadelphia. Captain Morris is eager to close this matter and redirect our resources to more pressing concerns." "Monday seems rather precipitous," William said carefully. "We've barely begun to explore all the leads. Surely a few more days of investigation wouldn't be unreasonable." "The captain disagrees," Brennan replied, his voice taking on a harder edge. "And frankly, Ashford, I'm surprised at your reluctance. One would think that a detective of your reputation would be able to recognize when a case has reached its natural conclusion. Unless, of course, you have some specific reason for wanting to prolong the investigation." The challenge was clear, and William recognized the danger of pushing too hard. Brennan was testing him, trying to determine whether William had stumbled onto anything that might threaten the carefully constructed cover-up. He needed to appear convinced, or at least resigned to the inevitable. "No specific reason," William said with a shrug that he hoped appeared genuine. "I simply prefer to be thorough. But if Captain Morris has made his decision, then I suppose we have little choice but to comply. I'll review the case files over the weekend and prepare my portion of the report." Something in Brennan's posture relaxed slightly. "Excellent. I'm glad we understand each other, Ashford. Cooperation between partners is essential, wouldn't you agree?" "Absolutely," William replied, taking another sip of his coffee to hide his expression. The bitter taste seemed appropriate for the deception he was being forced to maintain. Catherine appeared at their table once more, her face a perfect mask of professional courtesy. "Will there be anything else, gentlemen?" she asked, not looking directly at either of them. "Just the check, please," Brennan said dismissively, already gathering his documents. William reached into his pocket for money, and as Catherine placed the bill on the table, their eyes met for the briefest of moments. In that glance, William saw determination and hope, and he felt an overwhelming desire to protect this brave woman who had risked so much to seek justice for her brother. There was something growing between them, he realized, something unexpected and powerful that went beyond their shared purpose. They settled their bill and rose to leave. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, and the streets glistened under the gas lamps like rivers of liquid gold. Brennan pulled up the collar of his coat and turned to William with an expression that might have been friendly if not for the calculation in his eyes. "I'll see you Monday morning at the precinct," Brennan said. "Enjoy your weekend, Ashford. I'm sure you have better things to do than think about petty thefts." "Indeed," William replied. "Good evening, Brennan." He watched his supposed partner walk away into the mist, a dark figure disappearing into the night, and felt the weight of what he had learned settling onto his shoulders. Corruption within the police department, a murdered detective, a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of society, and now a woman whose courage had drawn him into the center of it all. William began walking in the opposite direction, his mind already planning for tomorrow's meeting at the bank. But he had gone no more than 2 blocks when his instincts, honed by years of police work, warned him that he was being followed. He didn't turn around, didn't alter his pace, but used the reflections in shop windows to catch glimpses of his pursuer, a man in a dark coat, staying about half a block behind, matching William's speed with practiced ease. So they were watching him already. Either Brennan had suspected something despite William's performance, or the surveillance had been in place longer than William had realized. Either way, it complicated matters considerably. He would need to be extremely careful tomorrow when meeting Catherine at the bank. Any mistake could cost them both their lives. William led his follower on a circuitous route through the city, doubling back several times, until he was certain he had identified the man and memorized his features. Then, with the casual confidence of someone who suspected nothing, he made his way to his modest townhouse on Spruce Street, let himself in, and locked the door behind him. The house was dark and quiet, a bachelor's residence that reflected the solitary nature of his work. William lit a lamp and poured himself a measure of whiskey, standing at the window and looking out at the rain-soaked street. The follower had taken up a position across the way, leaning against a lamppost with the studied casualness of a professional observer. William raised his glass in a mocking salute that the watcher couldn't see, then pulled the curtains closed. He had much to think about, plans to make, and precious little time to do it. Tomorrow he would meet Catherine at the bank, retrieve the evidence that James Merrick had died to protect, and begin the dangerous work of exposing the corruption that had infected his beloved police department. But as he sat in his study, reviewing what he knew and forming strategies, William found his thoughts returning again and again to Catherine Merrick. Her green eyes, her courage, the way she had trembled slightly even as she stood firm in her determination. He had encountered many people in his 12 years as a detective, but never anyone quite like her. There was a connection between them, something he couldn't quite define but could definitely feel, a pull that went beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. He thought of her brother James, a fellow detective who had chosen truth over safety and paid the ultimate price. William owed it to James's memory to see this through, to ensure that his sacrifice meant something. But more than that, he owed it to Catherine, who had waited and watched and risked everything on the hope that one honest man might help her. William finished his whiskey and prepared for bed, but sleep was long in coming. When it finally did, his dreams were filled with green eyes and whispered warnings, with shadows and danger, and with the certain knowledge that tomorrow would change everything. The morning dawned gray and cold, with fog rolling in from the Delaware River and wrapping the city in a ghostly shroud. William had been awake since before sunrise, his mind too active with plans and contingencies to allow for restful sleep. He dressed carefully in a dark suit and overcoat, checking his service revolver before placing it in the shoulder holster beneath his jacket. The weight of the weapon was both reassuring and sobering, a reminder that the day ahead might require more than clever words and careful observation. Looking out his window, William noted with satisfaction that his watcher from the previous night had been replaced by a different man, this one younger and less experienced, who made the mistake of staring too directly at William's door. Amateur surveillance, William thought with grim amusement. Either they were short on experienced men, or they didn't consider him enough of a threat yet to warrant their best operatives. He intended to use that underestimation to his advantage. William left his house at 9 o'clock, moving with the unhurried pace of a man embarking on routine Saturday errands. He walked to the corner newsstand and purchased a newspaper, then stopped at a small cafe for breakfast, deliberately taking his time and acting as though he had nowhere particular to be. His shadow followed dutifully, maintaining what he probably thought was a discreet distance. William pretended not to notice, but his detective's mind was cataloging every detail of the man's appearance and behavior for future reference. After breakfast, William employed a technique he had learned years ago from a former Pinkerton agent. He entered the Wanamaker's department store through the main entrance on Market Street, a massive establishment that occupied an entire city block and attracted hundreds of shoppers even on a Saturday morning. The building's size and multiple exits made it ideal for losing unwanted followers. William moved through the crowds with practiced ease, ascending to the third floor via the elevator, then descending via the rear staircase and exiting through the delivery entrance on Juniper Street. He emerged into an alley, paused to ensure he was alone, then made his way through a series of back streets toward Chestnut Street and the Merchants Trust Bank. The fog provided additional cover, reducing visibility to perhaps 50 feet in any direction. William checked his pocket watch, 10:15. He had timed it perfectly, allowing himself enough margin to observe the bank and its surroundings before Catherine arrived. The Merchants Trust Bank was an imposing structure of granite and marble, built in the classical style that suggested permanence and security. William positioned himself across the street in the doorway of a closed millinery shop, from where he could watch both the bank's entrance and the surrounding area. The street was moderately busy with Saturday morning traffic, carriages and the occasional automobile passing by, their engines coughing and sputtering in the damp air. A few pedestrians hurried past, heads down against the chill, concerned only with their own business. At precisely 11 o'clock, Catherine appeared, emerging from the fog like an apparition. She wore a dark green dress that complemented her eyes, and a simple but elegant coat with a modest hat adorned with a single feather. Even in the gray morning light, she was striking, carrying herself with that same quiet dignity William had observed at the diner. She paused at the bank's entrance, her eyes scanning the street, and William stepped from his hiding place, making his presence known. Their eyes met across the distance, and William saw relief flood Catherine's features. He crossed the street quickly, joining her at the bank's entrance, acutely aware of how close she stood, how the cold had brought color to her cheeks, how her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. "Good morning, Catherine," he said quietly, his voice warm despite the circumstances. "Any trouble getting here?" "None that I could detect," she replied, though her hand trembled slightly as she clutched her small purse. "Though I confess I'm not trained in such observations as you are. I followed your advice and varied my route, taking the trolley to Broad Street and walking the rest of the way." "You did well," William assured her, offering his arm. "Shall we?" Catherine placed her hand on his arm, and even through the layers of clothing, William felt the contact like a spark of electricity. They entered the bank together, and to any observer, they might have appeared to be a prosperous couple conducting ordinary financial business. The interior of the bank was all polished wood and gleaming brass, with high ceilings that echoed with the murmur of voices and the scratch of pens on paper. William approached one of the clerks, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the perpetually worried expression common to those who handled other people's money. "We need to access a safety deposit box," William said, producing the key Catherine had given him the previous night. The clerk examined the key, noted the number engraved on its surface, and consulted his ledger. His expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "Box number 47, he said slowly. "That box is registered to a Mr. James Merrick. Are you authorized to access this box, sir?" William had anticipated this moment and prepared accordingly. "I am Detective William Ashford of the Philadelphia Police Department," he said, showing his badge. "Mr. Merrick was a colleague who died in the line of duty 3 months ago. This is his sister, Miss Catherine Merrick, who is his legal heir. We need to access the box as part of the settlement of his estate." The clerk's expression softened with sympathy. Of course. My condolences, Miss Merrick. Your brother's death was a terrible tragedy. If you'll both follow me, please." He led them through a heavy metal door and down a flight of stairs into the vault area, a windowless room lined with row upon row of small metal doors. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint metallic scent of steel and the mustiness of old paper. The clerk located box 47, inserted his master key into one lock, and gestured for William to use the key Catherine had provided in the second lock. The box slid out smoothly, surprisingly heavy. The clerk placed it on a table in a small private room and discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind him and leaving William and Catherine alone with whatever secrets James Merrick had died to protect. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Catherine stood with her hand pressed to her mouth, tears glistening in her eyes as she stared at the metal box that represented her brother's final legacy. William placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, offering silent support, and felt her lean slightly into his touch, drawing strength from his presence. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Catherine nodded, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. "Yes, let's see what James wanted us to find." William lifted the lid of the box, and they both leaned forward to examine its contents. Inside were several items: a thick envelope containing what appeared to be documents, a smaller envelope with photographs, a leather-bound journal, and a letter addressed to Catherine in James Merrick's hand. Catherine reached for the letter with trembling fingers, breaking the seal and unfolding the pages. William watched her face as she read, seeing emotions play across her features like shadows, grief and love and determination intermingling in her expression. When she finished, she handed the letter to William without speaking, and he read the words of a dead man who had known his time was running short. "My dearest Catherine," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then my worst fears have been realized, and I have paid the price for my investigation. I do not regret my choices, for I have always believed that justice is worth any sacrifice. But I regret deeply the pain my death will cause you, and I pray that someday you will forgive me for leaving you alone in this world." The documents in this box represent months of careful investigation into a criminal conspiracy of staggering scope. The Rittenhouse Square thefts are merely the visible surface of an operation that extends throughout Philadelphia and beyond. At the center of this web is a man I have come to know as the conductor, though I have finally discovered his true identity. Captain Edward Morris, my own superior at the police department. William felt his blood run cold as he read the name. Captain Morris, the man who had assigned him to work with Brennan, the man who controlled the flow of information and resources for dozens of active investigations. If Morris was indeed the conductor, then the corruption was far worse than William had imagined, and they were both in more danger than he had realized. The letter continued. Morris has spent years building connections with criminal organizations in New York, Boston, and Baltimore. He provides protection for their operations in Philadelphia in exchange for a share of the profits. The thefts from wealthy homes are orchestrated by Morris himself, using information gathered through his position to identify targets and plan the crimes. He then ensures that investigations are mishandled or misdirected, protecting his criminal partners while maintaining his reputation as an effective police captain. I have documented everything in the enclosed journal, including dates, times, meetings I observed, and money transfers I was able to trace. The photographs show Morris meeting with known criminals, including Vincent Caruso of New York, the man who actually carries out the thefts, using a team of professional burglars. I intended to take this evidence to the commissioner, but I fear now that I waited too long, that Morris has suspected my investigation and moved against me. Catherine, if you receive this box, please find someone you can trust within the department, someone honest and capable, and give them this evidence. Do not try to handle this alone. These are dangerous men who will not hesitate to kill to protect their interests. I love you always. Your brother James. William set the letter down carefully, his mind racing through implications and strategies. He reached for the journal and began reading, finding page after page of meticulous documentation, the work of a skilled detective who had known he was building a case that might cost him his life. James Merrick had been thorough and brave, and his death had been exactly what Catherine suspected: murder disguised as a random crime, ordered by Captain Morris to silence a threat to his criminal empire. The photographs were damning, showing Morris in conversation with men whose faces William recognized from wanted circulars and criminal files. In several images, money was clearly changing hands. In others, Morris was shown entering buildings known to be associated with organized crime. The evidence was overwhelming, enough to destroy Morris's career and send him to prison for the rest of his life, if they could get it to someone with the authority and integrity to act on it. "The Commissioner," William said, looking up at Catherine. "We need to take this directly to Commissioner Harper. He's an honest man, appointed from outside the department specifically to root out corruption. This is exactly what he needs to clean house." "But how do we reach him?" Catherine asked, her voice strained with tension. "If Captain Morris controls so much of the department, won't he have people watching the Commissioner? Won't they try to stop us?" "Undoubtedly," William agreed, "which is why we need to be clever about this. Commissioner Harper lives in a private residence in Chestnut Hill. If we can reach him there, on a Saturday when he's not at the precinct, we might be able to present this evidence before Morris even knows we have it." "And Detective Brennan?" Catherine asked. "He's part of this too, isn't he? That's why he was brought from New York to help Morris close the investigation." "Almost certainly," William confirmed. "Brennan is probably connected to this Vincent Caruso that your brother mentioned, sent here to ensure that Morris's operation continues without interference. Which means that by now, Brennan has likely reported to Morris that I was asking too many questions, showing too much interest in continuing the investigation. We may already be running out of time." As if to confirm his words, they heard a commotion from the main floor of the bank above them, raised voices and the sound of heavy footsteps. William's instinct screamed danger, and he quickly gathered all the documents, photographs, and the journal, stuffing them into the large inner pocket of his overcoat. "We need to leave," he said urgently, taking Catherine's arm. "Now." They emerged from the small room to find the clerk hurrying toward them, his face pale with alarm. "Detective Ashford, there are men upstairs demanding to know if you're here. They claim to be police officers, but they're behaving most irregularly, threatening the staff." "Is there another way out?" William asked quickly. "The service entrance in the back," the clerk said, pointing. "It leads to an alley behind the bank." "But Detective, surely if they're police officers—" "They're not here on official business," William interrupted, already moving, pulling Catherine with him. "Thank you for your assistance. You've done nothing wrong, and you know nothing about what was in that box. Do you understand?" The clerk nodded, his eyes wide behind his spectacles, and William and Catherine ran through the vault area toward the service entrance. Behind them, they could hear the heavy door to the vault being wrenched open, and voices shouting for them to stop. William recognized Brennan's voice among them, confirming his worst fears. They burst through the service entrance into the alley, the cold air hitting them like a physical blow. William looked both ways, orienting himself quickly. "This way," he said, leading Catherine to the right, toward Market Street. They ran through the fog, their footsteps echoing off the brick walls of the buildings around them, and William could hear their pursuers emerging behind them, could hear Brennan shouting orders to split up and cut them off. Catherine ran beside him without complaint, holding her skirts up with one hand and keeping pace with impressive determination despite the hampering effect of her clothing. They emerged onto Market Street, and William immediately hailed a passing hansom cab, practically throwing Catherine inside and climbing in after her. "Chestnut Hill," he commanded the driver. "Commissioner Harper's residence on Willow Grove Avenue. There's an extra $1 in it if you get us there quickly and lose anyone who tries to follow." The driver, a grizzled man who had probably seen everything in his years navigating the city, took in William's badge and the urgency of the situation with a quick nod. "Hold on tight," he said, and snapped his whip. The horse leaped forward, and the cab lurched into motion, weaving through traffic with reckless speed. Inside the cab, William and Catherine were thrown together by the violent motion, and William found himself with his arm around her, holding her steady as they careened through the streets. She was breathing hard from their flight, her hat askew, strands of auburn hair coming loose from their pins, and William thought he had never seen anyone more beautiful or more brave. "I'm sorry," he said, looking into her eyes. I never imagined it would become this dangerous this quickly. I should have taken better precautions. You have nothing to apologize for, Catherine said firmly, her hand finding his and squeezing tightly. You believed me when no one else would. You're risking everything to help me bring James's killers to justice. I could never ask for more than that. Their faces were very close in the confined space of the cab, and William felt the pull between them, that inexplicable connection that had existed from the first moment their eyes had met. There was something profound happening here, something that went beyond their shared danger and purpose. In Catherine Merrick, he had found not just a brave ally, but a kindred spirit, someone whose courage and determination matched his own, someone who made him want to be worthy of the trust she had placed in him. The cab raced northward through the city, and William looked back to see if they were being followed. Through the fog, he could make out at least 2 other vehicles in pursuit, and his jaw tightened with determination. They had the evidence, but they still had to reach Commissioner Harper alive, and Morris's men would do everything in their power to stop them. The hansom cab raced through the streets of Philadelphia, its wheels clattering over cobblestones as the driver expertly navigated the Saturday traffic. William kept his arm protectively around Catherine, his other hand resting on the revolver beneath his coat, ready for whatever confrontation might come. Behind them, through the swirling fog, he could see their pursuers maintaining the chase, 2 carriages moving with grim determination through the crowded streets. As they crossed into the neighborhoods north of the city center, the traffic thinned and the pursuit became more obvious. William leaned forward, calling up to the driver. They're still following us. Can you lose them? The driver glanced back, his weathered face set with concentration. I can try, sir, but those are good horses they've got. We're carrying 2 passengers and they can match our speed. But I know these streets better than most, and the fog's our friend today. He turned sharply onto a side street, then immediately into an alley, the cab's wheels scraping against the narrow walls. They emerged onto another street and the driver turned again, weaving through a residential area where the houses stood close together, and the streets formed a maze of intersections. William watched through the rear window as their pursuers fell back, confused by the sudden turns, and for a moment he dared to hope they had escaped. But then, as they turned onto Germantown Avenue, a carriage appeared ahead of them, blocking the road. Brennan stood beside it, his coat open to reveal a pistol in his hand, and 2 other men flanked him, all 3 with weapons drawn. The driver pulled hard on the reins, and their cab skidded to a halt, the horse whinnying in protest. "End of the line, Ashford," Brennan called out, his voice carrying clearly through the fog. "Step out of the cab and hand over whatever you took from that bank. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." William felt Catherine tense beside him, her hand gripping his arm tightly. He looked into her frightened eyes and saw not panic but resolve, and in that moment he made a decision that would alter both their fates. "Trust me," he whispered to her, then called out to Brennan, "I'm coming out. Don't shoot." He climbed down from the cab slowly, his hands visible and empty, while his mind raced through possibilities. Brennan and his men were positioned in front of the cab, which meant the way behind was still clear. If he could create enough of a distraction, the driver might be able to turn the cab around and get Catherine to safety. It would mean sacrificing himself, likely his life. But he found he was willing to make that trade if it meant protecting her and ensuring the evidence reached Commissioner Harper. "Where's the evidence, Ashford?" Brennan demanded, moving closer, his pistol trained steadily on William's chest. "The documents, the photographs, the journal. We know James Merrick kept records. Hand them over and we might let you live." "Might?" William said, forcing a smile. "That's not much of an offer, Brennan. And even if I believed you, which I don't, I can't hand over what I don't have. We got to the bank too late. Someone had already emptied the box. Whatever Merrick hid is gone." "You're lying," Brennan snarled, and William saw his finger tighten on the trigger. "We have witnesses who saw you access the box, saw you take items from it. Tell me where they are, or I'll put a bullet in you right now. Then you'll never find them," William said calmly, though his heart was pounding. "I sent them ahead with a messenger to Commissioner Harper. By now, he's probably already reading about Captain Morris's criminal enterprise and your role in it. It's over, Brennan. The best thing you can do now is run. Get as far from Philadelphia as you can before Harper issues the warrants." Uncertainty flickered in Brennan's eyes, and William pressed his advantage. "Think about it. Why would I be running if I still had the evidence on me? I'd be going straight to the nearest precinct. The only reason we're trying to reach the commissioner is to ensure he gets the full story from us directly. but the evidence is already in his hands. It was a desperate bluff, but William sold it with every ounce of conviction he could muster. For a long moment, Brennan hesitated, and William could see the calculations happening behind those cold eyes. Then, from behind them, came the sound of more hooves, more carriages approaching, and William's heart sank. Their other pursuers had caught up, and now they were surrounded. But the approaching carriage that emerged from the fog bore not more of Morris's men, but the official seal of the police commissioner's office. It pulled to a stop, and Commissioner Harper himself stepped down, flanked by 6 uniformed officers, all with weapons drawn. Harper was a tall, distinguished man in his 60s with iron-gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Detective Brennan," Harper said, his voice cold with authority, "lower your weapon immediately. You and your associates are under arrest." Brennan's face went white with shock, and William understood in that moment that his bluff had accidentally become reality. Someone somehow had gotten word to Harper. But how? The answer came when another figure emerged from the commissioner's carriage. Their handsome cab driver, who was now removing a false beard and revealing himself to be a younger man in plain clothes. "Sorry for the deception, Detective Ashford," the man said with a slight smile. "Officer Thomas Riley, Commissioner's Special Investigative Unit. We've been watching Captain Morris for 2 months, waiting for him to make a mistake that would give us probable cause to move against him. When I recognized Detective Brennan at the bank this morning, acting outside his jurisdiction and with known criminal associates, I sent word immediately to Commissioner Harper." William felt a wave of relief so intense it left him momentarily dizzy. "You're telling me that whole wild ride through the city was necessary to keep you and Miss Merrick safe until the commissioner could arrive with sufficient force to make arrests?" Riley confirmed. "We couldn't risk intervening earlier and tipping off Morris that we were onto him. We needed Brennan and his men to act overtly, to show their hand. And thanks to your quick thinking at the bank, they did exactly that." Catherine had climbed down from the cab and now stood beside William, her hand finding his naturally, their fingers intertwining. Commissioner Harper approached them, his stern expression softening slightly as he took in their disheveled appearance and the obvious signs of their harrowing escape. "Detective Ashford, Miss Merrick," Harper said formally, "I understand you have evidence relating to corruption within my department. I would very much like to see it." William reached into his coat and withdrew the documents, photographs, and journal that James Merrick had died to protect. As he handed them to Harper, he felt Catherine squeeze his hand, and he looked down to see tears streaming down her face, not of sadness now, but of relief and vindication. Harper examined the materials with growing gravity, his expression darkening as he leafed through page after page of documentation. Finally, he looked up, his eyes hard. "This is comprehensive and damning. Captain Morris, Detective Brennan, and at least a dozen other officers are implicated here. Miss Merrick, your brother was a fine detective and a brave man. His work here will help us clean corruption out of this department and restore public trust. You have my word that his sacrifice will not be forgotten." "Thank you, Commissioner," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you can know. James always believed in justice, even when it cost him everything." Harper turned to his officers. "Take Brennan and his associates into custody. Use separate wagons and keep them isolated from each other. I want no opportunity for them to coordinate their stories. And send word to Judge Morrison that I need warrants executed immediately for Captain Morris and the others named in these documents." As Brennan was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of fury and defeat, he turned to William with pure hatred in his eyes. "You think you've won, Ashford? Morris has connections you can't imagine. This isn't over." "Yes, it is," William said firmly. "Your network is broken, and everyone involved will answer for their crimes, including Morris. The evidence is overwhelming, and there's nowhere left to hide." Brennan was pushed into a police wagon, and William felt the tension that had gripped him since the previous night finally begin to ease. They had done it. Against all odds, they had exposed the conspiracy and lived to see justice begin its course. But more than that, they had forged something precious in the crucible of danger, a connection that transcended the circumstances that had brought them together. Commissioner Harper arranged for William and Catherine to be escorted to his office, where they spent the next several hours providing detailed statements and answering questions. Harper listened intently, occasionally making notes, and William found himself impressed by the commissioner's thoroughness and obvious commitment to rooting out corruption completely. Detective Ashford, Harper said when they had finished, your instincts and integrity in this matter have been exemplary. The department needs more men like you, especially now as we rebuild trust and credibility. I'd like to offer you a position in my special investigative unit, working directly under my authority to investigate and prevent corruption within the ranks. It would mean a promotion and a significant increase in responsibility. William considered the offer carefully. It was an honor, certainly, and exactly the kind of meaningful work he had always wanted to do. But he found himself looking at Catherine, sitting beside him with her green eyes bright with pride and affection, and he realized that his priorities had shifted in profound ways over the past 2 days. I'm honored, Commissioner, William said slowly, but might I request a week to consider the offer? Recent events have given me much to think about, and I'd like to ensure I'm making the right decision. Harper smiled slightly, his eyes moving between William and Catherine with understanding. Of course, Detective. Take the time you need. This has been an ordeal for both of you, and you've earned some rest. Miss Merrick, I want you to know that the department will be covering all funeral expenses for your brother, and there will be a full ceremony honoring his service and sacrifice. It's the least we can do. Thank you, Commissioner, Catherine said softly. James would have been proud to know that his work led to real change. As they left the commissioner's office, the afternoon sun was breaking through the fog, bathing the city in golden light. William and Catherine stood on the steps of the municipal building, neither quite ready to part ways, both acutely aware that they stood at a crossroads where the paths of their futures would be determined. Walk with me, William asked, offering his arm, and Catherine accepted with a smile that made his heart race. They walked through Rittenhouse Square, the very neighborhood where the thefts that had started this entire investigation had taken place. The park was lovely in the afternoon light, with children playing under the watchful eyes of their nannies and couples strolling the paths between carefully tended flower beds. William found a bench overlooking a small fountain and gestured for Catherine to sit. For a long moment, they sat in comfortable silence, and William marveled at how natural it felt to be beside her, as though they had known each other far longer than 2 days. Finally he spoke, choosing his words carefully, because he sensed that what he said now would matter more than anything he had ever said before. Catherine, I know we met under extraordinary circumstances, brought together by tragedy and danger. But I find myself hoping that what began in crisis might continue in calmer times. These past 2 days, seeing your courage, your determination, your grace under pressure, I've come to admire you deeply. More than admire, if I'm being honest. Catherine turned to face him, her eyes searching his, and William saw hope and vulnerability in her expression. I feel it too, she said softly. From that first moment at the diner, when I decided to trust you, I sensed something special about you, William. You're everything I imagined a true detective should be. Honest, brave, compassionate. You risked your life to help me find justice for James, and you never once made me feel like a burden or an obligation. You made me feel valued and protected. You are valued, William said earnestly, taking her hand in both of his. Catherine, I understand if you need time to grieve, to process everything that's happened. But I want you to know that I would very much like to continue seeing you, to get to know you better when we're not running for our lives. I think we could have something remarkable together, if you're willing to give us a chance. Tears glistened in Catherine's eyes, but her smile was radiant. I would like that very much. James always told me that when you find someone who makes you want to be braver, stronger, better than you are, you should hold on to them. You make me feel all of those things, William, and I think James would approve. He always said that the best relationships were partnerships built on mutual respect and shared values. We certainly have that. William felt joy surge through him, pure and overwhelming. He reached up and gently cupped Catherine's face, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. May I kiss you? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, Catherine breathed, and William leaned forward, pressing his lips to hers, in a kiss that was tender and sweet, and full of promise. The world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, two souls who had found each other in the darkness, and emerged together into the light. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Catherine laughed softly. Well, that was worth waiting for. Indeed it was, William agreed, his gray eyes warm with affection. Though I must say, I prefer this kind of excitement to being chased through the streets by corrupt policemen. As do I, Catherine said with feeling. So what happens now? With the investigation, with Captain Morris, with everything? Now the legal process begins, William explained, keeping her hand in his. Commissioner Harper will use James's evidence to build cases against Morris and everyone involved in the conspiracy. There will be trials, testimonies, probably months of legal proceedings. But the corruption has been exposed, and the department can begin to heal. As for Morris himself, I suspect he's already been arrested. Harper wouldn't have shown his hand unless he was prepared to move immediately. And the position Harper offered you? Catherine asked. Will you take it? William considered the question thoughtfully. I think I will, yes. It's important work, and I want to honor your brother's legacy by ensuring that the department he served becomes worthy of officers like him. But I'll only take it if it doesn't interfere with what I hope will be a priority in my life. Courting you properly, Miss Merrick. Catherine blushed prettily, her eyes sparkling. I think I can accommodate both your professional ambitions and your personal ones, Detective Ashford. Though I should warn you, I have ambitions of my own. I've been working as a waitress out of necessity, but I was educated at the Drexel Institute. I studied business administration, and I've always wanted to open my own establishment, perhaps a tea room or a bookshop. Now that James's name has been cleared and his service recognized, I'll receive his pension and death benefits. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to start building a future. Then we'll build that future together, William said firmly. Your dreams and mine intertwined. I can think of nothing I'd want more. They sat together on that bench as the afternoon lengthened into evening, talking about their hopes and plans, sharing stories of their pasts, learning all the small details that would form the foundation of their relationship. William told Catherine about his childhood in Pittsburgh, his decision to become a police officer after witnessing an act of random kindness from a detective who had helped his family during a difficult time. Catherine spoke of James, not just of his death, but of his life, painting a picture of a loving brother who had encouraged her education and supported her independence even when society frowned upon ambitious women. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, William walked Catherine home to the modest apartment she had shared with her brother. They stood at her door, reluctant to part even for the night, and William found himself already counting the hours until he could see her again. Tomorrow is Sunday, he said, still holding her hand. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me to dinner? Somewhere proper, where we can celebrate not just surviving, but truly beginning our lives together. I would be delighted, Catherine said. Though I must warn you, after the past 2 days, anything that doesn't involve running from armed men or uncovering criminal conspiracies might seem rather dull. William laughed, the sound rich and genuine. I rather hope our future involves less mortal danger and more peaceful happiness. Though knowing our luck, we'll probably stumble into adventures wherever we go. As long as we stumble into them together, Catherine said, rising on her toes to kiss him once more. A brief but sweet touch of lips that left them both smiling. William walked home through the twilight streets of Philadelphia, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The case was solved, justice would be served, and he had found something he hadn't even known he was searching for. A partner in every sense of the word. A woman whose courage matched his own, whose dreams complemented his, whose presence made him want to be the best version of himself. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Captain Morris was arrested at his home, the evidence against him so overwhelming that even his expensive lawyers couldn't mount an effective defense. The trials were sensational, filling the newspapers and shocking the public with revelations of how deep the corruption had run. William testified multiple times and Catherine attended every session, her presence a quiet reminder of the human cost of Morris's crimes. Vincent Caruso and his burglary ring were apprehended in New York, and the stolen items from the Rittenhouse Square thefts were recovered and returned to their owners. Commissioner Harper personally oversaw the investigation into every officer named in James Merrick's documentation, and by the time the dust settled, 14 members of the Philadelphia Police Department had been arrested, tried, and convicted. James Merrick was posthumously honored with the department's highest award for valor and integrity, and his funeral was attended by hundreds of officers and citizens who wanted to pay their respects to a man who had given his life for justice. Catherine wept as Commissioner Harper presented her with James's badge and medal, but they were tears of pride as much as sorrow, and William stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. offering silent support and strength. True to his word, William accepted the position in Commissioner Harper's Special Investigative Unit, and he threw himself into the work of rebuilding trust in the police department. But he never let his professional obligations interfere with his personal life, and he courted Catherine with old-fashioned devotion and modern respect for her independence and ambitions. 6 months after that rainy November night when Catherine had written her desperate warning on a napkin with lipstick, William took her back to the Rosewood Diner, to the very booth where their story had begun. The owner had saved the napkin, recognizing its historical significance, and it was now framed and hanging on the wall, a testament to courage and trust and the power of doing the right thing. William ordered coffee and apple pie, just as he had that first night, and when the waitress brought their order, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a beautiful diamond ring. "Catherine Merrick," he said, his voice steady but his eyes shining with emotion. "You took an extraordinary risk when you decided to trust me with your brother's secret. You believed in me when you had every reason to be suspicious of all policemen. You showed me what true courage looks like, and you've made me happier than I ever imagined possible. Would you do me the tremendous honor of becoming my wife?" Catherine's green eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant with joy. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, William. 1,000 times yes. James once told me that the best marriages were partnerships between equals, built on trust and mutual respect. We have all of that and more. I can't imagine a future without you in it." William slipped the ring onto her finger, and they sealed their engagement with a kiss that was witnessed and applauded by every patron in the diner. The owner brought them champagne on the house, and strangers offered congratulations, and William thought that this was perhaps the perfect ending to a story that had begun in fear and danger, but had transformed into something beautiful. They were married 3 months later in a ceremony attended by Commissioner Harper, Officer Riley, and dozens of friends and colleagues who had come to respect and admire the couple who had exposed one of Philadelphia's worst corruption scandals. Catherine wore a dress of ivory silk and carried white roses, and William had never seen anything more beautiful than the sight of her walking down the aisle toward him, her face glowing with love and happiness. Catherine opened her tea room 6 months after their wedding, a charming establishment near Rittenhouse Square that quickly became popular with Philadelphia's literary and intellectual set. William continued his work in the Commissioner's Special Unit, and together they became known as a formidable team, occasionally collaborating on cases where Catherine's sharp mind and keen observations proved invaluable. Years later, when they told their children the story of how they met, those children would be amazed that such a dramatic beginning could lead to such a peaceful and happy life. But William and Catherine knew the truth, that the best relationships were forged in fire, tested by adversity, and strengthened by choosing each other every day, in danger and in safety, in triumph and in difficulty. The lipstick-stained napkin remained on the wall of the Rosewood Diner for decades, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust a stranger, and that justice, like love, is worth any risk.